Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for today's session. My name is Firas, and I'm the event planner for Microsoft Reactor in Redmond. Before we start, I have a few things to go over. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary and please remain professional on topic. This session is recorded. It will be available through Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. I'll be sharing the link to our YouTube channel in the chat. I'll also be sharing some links for the Reactor Meetup page and a link to have your feedback if you have some time. Which brings us to our session today. This session will run approximately for 1 hour, and I'm gonna pass this over to our presenter today. Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you for us. I appreciate the introduction. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this reactor session here. I'm going to take over in a little bit here, but we have an introduction to containers in Azure and Docker today. We have been sort of doing a lot of Linux content this month. But yeah, chat, take a second to tell me how you're doing, where you're checking in from, all those kinds of things. If at any point you sort of can't hear me, I'm going too fast, something's going on with the video, anything like that, please feel free to let me know. I'm going to bring up my screen at the moment. Yes, introduction to containers on Azure. That is a picture of me right here. My name is Gwyneth Pena Seguenza, but y'all can call me Gwen for short. As we can see, oh, here we go. Boris saying hello. Hi everyone. But yes, very, very cool. Today, introduction to containers on Azure. If at any point you have, I don't know, any questions, feel free to ask the chat. If you want to follow me or ask me questions, the easiest place is to do it on some sort of social media. I have too many social media profiles. But I'm at Made by GPS on everything: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn, GitHub. You can also go to aka.ms/madebyGPS. And you'll find all my links there, okay? But we see we have Brazil, Indonesia, we have Minnesota, we have Florida checking in. Very, very cool. But very exciting stuff, people. All right, so what do we have on the agenda for today? We're talking about containers, Docker, and we've got a little demo at the end. What is containers? What problems do containers solve? What is Docker? Docker architecture, Docker images, Docker file. And the demo itself is we're going to build a containerized web app with Docker and deploy it to Azure container instances. I got a comment there in Spanish. Hola desde Boston. Saludos, Boston. Fun fact, I am doing this exact same session in Spanish on Thursday. So if Spanish is your first language and you'd rather sort of receive the material on that, that's going to be available for you as well. All right, cool. We are dropping a lot of links in the chat. I've put together additional resources on top of the session. There's a GitHub repo that has a bunch of info in there. There are, I believe, 2 Microsoft Learn links that you can spend additional time. They're like tutorials, hands-on things for you to learn. And I believe there's also like a learning path in there that's like a 5-hour sort of, to an extent, it's like a course. It's all free for you all to reinforce your learning alongside the session, right? But like I said, at any point, ask me anything, tell me anything, if I'm going too fast, anything, whatever it might be, let me know. All right, cool. Containers. I switched back to using PowerPoint and slides because I like, I don't know, I just miss it. I used to think it was too old school. But anyway, we have slides, and these slides are available at the GitHub, which we put into the chat. Everything is in there, okay? Cool. So let's start off first by defining what exactly a container is. According to Microsoft Docs, a container is a standard package of software that bundles an application's code together with the related configuration files and libraries, and with the dependencies required for the app to run. All right. So I tried to keep that to a one line while also using what Microsoft Docs provides us, right? Let's use sort of a diagram to further explore this definition of a container, okay? So you see here we have a containerized application, And we have app A, app B, app C, app D, app E, app F, right? Then we have something called Docker. We're going to dive into Docker a little bit later. It's going to be in the session, but not right now. But understand Docker is just something we use to work with containers, okay? Then we have a host operating system. That could be something like Linux, some sort of distro of Linux, Ubuntu and such. Could be Windows. And then we have the actual infrastructure that the operating system is working on. And that's the bare metal, the server itself, right? And all of these individuals, A through F, are containerized applications. So a containerized application stands for an application that it has been put into a container, right? And then you can see that though we're on the same infrastructure, we're using one operating system. And then we have Docker. We have many different containers in here, okay? What exactly a container is, the difference between a container and an image will become a little bit more clear as we go. I've defined all of this in this presentation. So what problems do containers solve? So let's start first with talking a little bit about efficient use of hardware, and that's on this left side here. So in this diagram, we have one server here, and then one server here. And this is more of your traditional sort of virtual machine setup, right? You see we have a virtual machine, you'll have your host operating system, Windows server, Linux server, right? Then you have a hypervisor, which is sort of this, this layer of technology that will turn your server into something that can essentially work as a virtual machine, right? Then we have a virtual machine guest operating system, which could be different than the host OS. Then we have libraries, and then we have the actual application. If we compare this to utilizing a container, we'll have the host operating system on the server itself. Then we have Docker, and then we have application and libraries, and those things are shared, right? So it's more efficient because we don't need to have, different like virtual machines. We essentially just use one, right? We also have a container isolation as sort of a benefit, or sort of it like solves these challenges that we have with traditional virtual machines. Whereas when you're using a traditional virtual machine, you have one, for example, in this case, we have 3 apps, and then in the containerized one, we also have 3 apps as well. And you see we'll need a separate virtual machine for each application if we want it to get to isolation, right? So in order for there to be no way for this application to interact with this other application in like a safe way, you essentially have to have different virtual machines deployed on an operating system or a server, right? But when it comes to using containers, since by default containers are isolated, they work inside of their own environments and they just live there. They can't really interact with other containers. Well, they're not meant to. That's why you can have sort of 1, 2, 3 different libraries, Docker on there, and you don't need multiple virtual machines, right? Okay, cool. Some more things that containers solve or help us with is application portability, because containers run almost everywhere. On-prem, run in the cloud, Azure in this case, AWS, Google Cloud, etc. If you had some sort of hybrid setup as well, you'd also have that too. And we also have application delivery. So since a container essentially becomes the unit of distribution, it'll ensure that, hey, if I have a container and I share it with a different development team, they're working off of that, and it essentially becomes a standard, right? So it's a standard format. And this, when you take this into consideration, and you have like pipelines, you have CI/CD pipelines and things like that, these DevOps practices, it's a lot easier for you to build proper and efficient pipelines if you're working off a standard, and a container becomes your standard, right? And then cloud deployments. Docker containers are essentially the default container architecture in Azure and many of the other very popular cloud platforms, and even the smaller cloud platforms. So you can bet your if you're looking to sort of invest time in upskilling and learning a new technology, learning something like Docker is going to be useful in no matter which cloud or which environment, like I mentioned, on-prem, hybrid that you're working with. Just wanted to check in, everyone. Can you still hear me? Can you still see me? I think we're having some issues with LinkedIn, but I think that might be on LinkedIn side. If you're checking in from YouTube, checking in from Twitch, can you let me know if everything is working, please? Awesome. All right. Next, let's dive into a little bit about Docker. So I had been saying Docker a lot, but what exactly is Docker? Sometimes people will sort of interchange Docker and container. That isn't necessarily correct. It's sort of like saying a tablet and iPad, or like, I don't know, like dishwasher and Whirlpool, something like that, right? So Docker is an open source project for automating the deployment of applications as portable, self-sufficient containers that can run on the cloud or on-premise. Essentially, this is telling us that Docker is the most popular platform to work with containers, right? Like I said, the most popular tablet out there is an iPad, so you might be quick to think like, oh, every tablet out there is an iPad, or, essentially that's it, right? And again, I took this from Microsoft Docs, so shout out to them. So what is actually Docker? Like I mentioned, it's the most popular platform to work with containers. There are some alternatives out there that are gaining a lot of popularity. I think Podman is probably the most popular one. YouTube is just saying here, I can hear you on YouTube fine. All good here via YouTube. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, cool. So it says Podman, there's LXD, there's Containerd or Containered, one of the most popular, some of the most popular alternatives out there. And then, like I mentioned, since essentially the Docker containers or containers are part of this concept of cloud native, and then alongside and with Azure, we're committed to making sure these cloud native runs perfectly with the platform. We have several services in Azure that will work with Docker containers. You can deploy your web apps via a Docker container with Azure App Service, or you can use Azure Container Instances, which we're going to use later on in the demo. You can use Azure Kubernetes Service to orchestrate your containers. You can use Azure Functions, so you can deploy an Azure function from within a Docker container as well. Azure Spring Cloud, if you do Spring development. And the newest one that I forgot to add here, Azure Container Apps. I don't think I put this on there, but that's also another option. Okay. Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about Docker architecture. So essentially we have the two big parts, I guess. We have the Docker Hub and then the Docker host. The Docker host contains the Docker engine, and the Docker engine itself has the Docker server, which communicates via a REST API with the Docker client, and vice versa. Like these two can communicate via a REST API. The Docker client, if you've worked with Docker, the client is essentially the CLI. So you know the commands like Docker image, Docker build, Docker PS, all things like that. That's the CLI. And that's what you use to work with your containers, build them, execute commands, right? The Docker server is a daemon. A daemon is a program, a process, or a task that runs in the background. So it doesn't have a UI. And the daemon's job is to sort of grab the responses or the requests from the client and execute them. It also works with other daemons. So if there are other processes that the container needs to work with, the Docker server is there to essentially do that. And then we have the sort of other Docker objects like images, networking, aspects, storage, all these kinds of things that are sort of additional things that Docker may work with. Those are like Docker objects. And here we're just showing images, but there are more there. And then the Docker Hub. So Docker Hub is our container registry. Container registry is sort of, think of like GitHub. What GitHub is for your code, Docker Hub or a container registry would be for your containers, right? It's somewhere where you can host your images, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and you can share them, you can pull them from there. Like think of like GitHub, you can pull, push, things like that. It's that, but for images, right? And Docker Hub is just one container registry. There's actually an open format. If you can implement that, you can have your own registry. You can have like private registries. Microsoft has their private ones for internal use and stuff like that. Right? Okay, cool. Let's see here. Now we're going to talk about Docker images. So what is an image? So an image is a static representation of the app. or service, whatever you're building, and its configuration and dependencies. And here's where people sometimes get a little confused as to like what's the difference between a container and an image. And I like to think about it this way. An image is, let's say, like your recipe or like everything that you need to make a container. And then when you run that image, it's a container. So a container essentially is a running image, right? So they're to an extent interchangeable, but not really. I like this this diagram that we have here on the left side. So you see we have our images, and you see that to have sort of like these layers on them. And you see this one's like a .NET image. This one's some sort of app. We have a Node image on Linux, .NET image on Linux, and things like that. And you can see that we're pulling a container from a registry. There's a bunch of different registries in here. And it says here, a registry stores many static images. So we're grabbing the image from the registry. And you see this is like a two-way thing, because again, you're supposed to use a registry to share your images, right? It's not just like you just keep them locally. You'll want to, like, if you provide any updates or things like that, you want to push them to some sort of registry, okay? And then the Docker server or the Docker engine will grab the image and then build a container with it. And once it's running, you can see here image instance running an app process. That could be a service or a web application, right? And that is what your container is. I hope that sort of makes this sense. But anyway, I'm just going to take the YouTube chat here for a quick second. All here good on YouTube. Thank you very much. Cisco says, hola, hola, ¿qué tal? 60 people watching, only 10 likes. Let's get likes, guys. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, so the image is made up of a bunch of things, actually. And remember, an image needs to have absolutely everything you need to run an app. So it's not just your code. It's application code, system packages, binaries, libraries, config files, operating systems. There may be more stuff in there I could have missed, but essentially this is what you have, right? And then the image, like I mentioned, when run, becomes a container. And an image is immutable. To apply changes to it, you would have to create a new image. So if I have an image, say I describe it, and I build my image, but I want to make changes, I can't change that image. I just have to, make the changes and then build another one. And I'll show you what I mean by that, right? But cool. And again, these slides are all available on the GitHub. You can use these for notes if you're studying, I don't know, for some sort of Azure developer certification or the DevOps certification, anything that has any questions about containers. It might be useful for you. So take a look at the GitHub repo. It has everything that you need there. Okay. And finally, Docker file. So we sort of have these three sort of concepts that are important at the moment. We have a Docker container, we have a Docker image, and then we have a Docker file. The Docker file is the text file that has step-by-step instructions on how to build your image. And then once your image is running, it's a container, okay? Does that make sense? So the actual thing that you write out, you sort of use code to build is the Docker file. And we have an example here. So it's a text file that contains the instructions to build and run a Docker image. And you can see here we have this from, where we're going to specify the parent image for the new image. So usually when you're working with Docker images, you're not building it from complete scratch, because there are these things like base images that are sort of like templates, right? Other people have created apps that might be similar to yours. You have, or I don't know, there's like a .NET Core. We're going to use a .NET one a little bit later. So you don't have to start from scratch, because that would be a waste of time. So you're saying, all right, from Ubuntu, for example, so we're going to start with this base image here. So the base image or parent image is what we're using to base our image on, right? Following that, we typically have commands to update the base OS and install any additional software. So in this case, we're updating. If you're familiar with Linux administration, we're doing app update and then app install. And we're just installing some Nginx stuff. Typically after that, we'll build artifacts to include. So this is where we'll bring in our code or anything else that we're actually running, right? Our developed application and anything like that, right? After that, we'll have anything that we need to expose, like services that we need to expose. In that case, it's this 80. So this is telling us, okay, we're going to expose 80, port 80, and port 80. And again, we'll see this in an example later on, okay? And then the last one is essentially the command that when I launch the container, when I go to the container, when I visit via an IP address or a URL, what happens. And in this case, it's just saying, okay, that's called entry point. It's saying, okay, .NET, we're going to visit the DLL. If you haven't worked with .NET, it's essentially the outputted, the built application that you can visit, right? Cool. Okay. So yes, we have command to run when the container is launched. All right, fantastic. So again, keep in mind, sort of like the three most important, and this is like an introductory level to Docker. If you go to the GitHub repo, there's a lot more in terms of like how images work, a little bit about like the layers, file systems, and stuff like that. I think it's actually really interesting to understand how Docker works in general. But this is sort of like the most important part for you to understand. You got containers, you got images, and you got files. You'll probably be working with Docker files the most. But understanding the underlying architecture is also pretty neat. All right, cool. Let's take a look here. What do we have after this? All right. So like I mentioned, I have a bunch of other things that you can use to like reinforce and upscale before we dive into our demo. So there's an introduction to Docker containers. I think it's about an hour long. You're going to learn more in depth about images, Docker files, commands, and more. And then we have a build a containerized web application with Docker, and that's the exercise that we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing part of it. I think it's actually has like 2 or 3 exercises in it. We're going to be doing one of them in this session. And then finally at the end here, we have administer containers in Azure. And this is a 5-hour learning path. It's completely free. And you go through things like intro to Docker, container instances, container registry. And you also have an introduction to Azure Kubernetes service. Most likely, if you're familiar with Docker, you're familiar with container orchestration and familiar with the most popular platform for container orchestration, which would be Kubernetes. And at Azure, we have Azure Kubernetes Service, which is a fully hosted Kubernetes or orchestration for containers in Azure. And this learning path here has a introduction to that. Next week, so Tuesday, same time, next week, I'm also going to be doing one, an introduction to Kubernetes Service on Azure for about an hour or so. So sort of following the same kind of level, the same kind of like feel, the same kind of like workshop, I guess, style. We're just going to do some theory, and then we're going to do some Kubernetes stuff on for that one too. But yeah, be sure to grab these slides and such for that. Okay, so let me switch back to full camera because I'm going to get the demo stuff ready here. And I'm going to close PowerPoint because I don't want my laptop to start glitching on me. But let me grab a few things that I need here. Let me go on this side. We'll put this here. Sorry, I just have to reorganize my screens because, as you know, there's a lot going on. Okay, let me bring up my terminal here. And if I let me see, where are we at? Here we go. Okay, fantastic. Actually, let's do, I think it's this one here. All right, can everybody see here? I think that's pretty decent size there. I'm using Windows Terminal. I'm on a Surface laptop here for this demo that we're going to be running through. But yeah, just make sure like the font's large enough and all those kinds of things too, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a custom, let's just make it one more bigger there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a base image. We're going to customize it with our Docker file, and then we're going to deploy it locally. And then we're going to deploy it to Azure Container Registry. Like I mentioned, we need to share our images somewhere. We're going to use Azure Container Registry. And then after that, we're going to deploy it to Azure Container Instances, which is one of the services that we can use in Azure to host our containers. I would say it's one of the more simpler ones. It's great for like if you have like smaller projects, maybe like single service kind of things. Container instances is great. Or if you also need it to sort of burst for your Azure Kubernetes services or something like that, or to scale. It's actually great for that too, or like as an additional container service, fantastic as well. But yeah, since this is sort of like a simpler example, we're going to use that too. Maybe I'll do different demos on other like services too. Will this example be the same in Linux? Yes, it will be. Okay. So the first thing we're gonna do is let me just make sure I have. Okay, cool. So there's a GitHub code that I'm gonna clone. So first thing I'm gonna do is git clone, and I think it's, let me copy the URL. Essentially what we have is like this reservation system. The application itself doesn't matter too much. I'm not much of a front-end developer or developer in general. I'm more of in the cloud operations, cloud engineering space. But essentially it is a .NET application that works with like reservations, right? And this is an example that's already built. I didn't build this, right? Okay, cool. So I've cloned the code, and I'm going to move into it. Let's see, mslearn, and then we'll clear this up here. And then we'll just list everything that we have in here. Oh, goodness. Sorry. See, this is my issue. I typically work with Bash, and then I'll do like ls. Will ls work here? Ls will work here, but then there's certain options that won't work here. So like sort of doing like that mental switch, like, oh no, you're not in Bash. Okay, cool. Can everyone still hear me fine? I was having a little bit issues earlier with audio, so I just want to make sure nothing is, there's no issues there either, okay? So just let me know. Okay. Fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to open this up and, we're going to move into the source folder here. And then we're going to clear this up, and then we're going to open this up in Visual Code. Let me bring this up here. Fantastic. And I can actually make this smaller here. Oh, where are you going? 1 second. All right, there we go. Full size here. I will make sure to make things larger here. We're going to close that. We're going to close this. Great. Okay, I probably need to make this a little larger like that. Probably like that. Okay, cool. I don't want to lose too much space in there. Actually, if I move myself lower to here, that might be even a little easier for us to see. Okay, cool. So we have this application. We have a couple of, if you're familiar with .NET, you don't need to necessarily be too familiar with what's going on here, the application itself. But we've got 3 projects here. We've got a hotel reservation system, we've got a hotel reservation system test client, and then system types, right? Again, the application itself doesn't necessarily matter. What we're going to do is create a new file called Docker. Docker file. And this is the naming convention that Docker files have. They have to start with, they have to be called Docker file, capital, and no extension. And you see there are actually extensions in Visual Code that will help you fill out what you need in your Docker file. And you can see it has a little icon here of the whale, which is the mascot of Docker, and it already knows, okay, this is a Docker file. All right, cool. So what I'm going to do is sort of start putting together the Docker file. And the first thing I'm going to say is, all right, from where? From my base image. In my case, I'm going to say MCR. I think that stands for Microsoft Container Registry. .microsoft.com/.net/core.sdk2.2. Okay. So this is telling me, okay, I want to start my image, base it off this image that has been already provided. A lot of these like owners of images tend to be like larger companies who just provide images for like best practices. So I would highly recommend for you to go like search for an image to base your things on instead of starting from scratch. Okay, awesome. Then I'm gonna say work dir is going to be src. Okay, fantastic here. What are we saying here? So we're saying, all right, from base image, all right, and now work dir means where am I currently going to be working in? Remember, this is the Docker client is running in a CLI. So you're going to tell it where are these commands running from. And I'm saying /src, okay? Next, I'm going to start copying some files. So we are going to start copying some CS proj files, which are essentially this one here, and I think we also need this one here, this .csproj here. CS proj files are, I can show you here. Essentially, it just tells us like the binaries, the dependencies, libraries that our .NET application needs to build. So in this case, we see that we need Razor design, web code generation design, right? So essentially, it's a .NET file that tells whatever it's running it, like, hey, you need these packages and dependencies to run, right? And in order for my container to work, I need to provide the container that as well. So what I'm going to do first here is tell which file to copy. So first we're going to say hotel reservation system, and then hotel reservation system.csproj, right? Because we're working at this level here, so our Docker file is here. We need to go into this folder and then grab that csproj, and then we're going to tell it where to copy it to. Then we'll provide it a comma. And then we're just going to say, okay, on the container, what directory are we going to copy it into? And we're just, we need double quotes there. Hotel reservation system, just like that. All right, fantastic. And then we're going to do the same with this system types here. If we open this csproj, we'll see that we have really nothing's in here. Oh, let me close this. All it's saying is like it's a .NET Core app. Fantastic. So we'll close this. We'll close this just to have a little bit more space. We'll close this here too. I can probably just copy this to save myself some typing. Paste that in there too. Hotel system types, and then again types, and then here we'll just say types. Oh, I forgot to add this to indicate that it's actually a directory, types. I think we got that too. Fantastic. Okay. So if you're familiar with .NET applications, you need to run .NET restore, which is a command that will grab your csproj file and then build it. It'll use that file to say like, okay, I need to go download this, I need to use this and this kind of stuff, right? So with Docker, you can use the keyword run, and then essentially you're telling your Docker file, like, I need you to run this command. And then we provide the command. So .NET restore. And where are we going to, what file are we going to run this with? It's going to be hotel reservation system dot csproj. Fantastic. Okay. I misspelled this here. Restore. Okay, cool. Let me just save as we go. Even though I have auto save on, I get a little paranoid. So again, what's going on here is we have the code has commands to sort of fetch the image that has a .NET Core Framework app as a base image. Then it's going to copy the project files from the hotel reservation system csproj, and then the type project as well. And those are copied to the source directory on the container, right? And then we're running .NET restore to download everything that we absolutely need to run the application, right? Okay, so we need a few things. Copy dot space dot. So this is where we're actually going to start copying our code. Essentially what we're telling is to copy everything to space to the container. That's really all this thing is saying, right? That's going to bring all our code, everything there. Next, we're going to move into another directory, work directory, and we're going to say src - hotel reservation system. Okay, so you see the difference between the work directory up here and then the work directory down here is that down here we're specifying it with double quotes. When we don't have double quotes, we're simply saying like, okay, we're working with something on the container. So this work dir, the /source is on the container, right? So we're creating this directory source on the container, and then we're copying these files there. But down here, our work dir is with double quotes, so we're saying locally. We're working within a directory locally, or a path locally here. We're gonna run, again, provide another command to run, and we're gonna say .NET build build hotel reservation system .csproj, and then we're going to create a release for this, and then the output of this we're going to put it into the app directory on the container. Okay, so again, let me recap what's going on here. So we have copy everything from the local machine to our container. Then we're going to set our work directory to the hotel reservation system. And then the reason we have to set it to this is because we're going to run .NET build on the file that is inside of this directory, which again is local. And the release, so we're building a release of our application. The release, we're going to save it on our container, which is going to be on the app folder. Okay, cool. And then finally, we have to do just a few more things, and then we can get to actually trying to get this to run. Okay, cool. Next, we got to do run .NET publish. Again, we're running another command. Hotel reservation system. Actually, no, .NET publish. Yes, proj. Yes, hotel.net. Okay, cool. And then with the release, we're going to also do that into the app itself. Okay, cool. And then the .NET publish command will copy the executable files for the website to a new folder, essentially. And this folder is what can get deployed and you get your website, right? Okay, cool. Now we have to use the expose command. So remember I was saying that you would use the expose to sort of expose ports, right? So what we're going to say is just expose port 80. And then we're going to set the work directory to that app directory that we've been using here, right? Because remember, our build and our release are going to be in our app directory. So now we're going to move into there. And then we're going to add the last part of this Docker file, which is entry point. I'm not used to working off the keyboard of my laptop, so I make a lot of mistakes. I apologize about that. All right, .NET, and then hotel reservation system.dll. Okay, so what is going on here? I think I need to put a space here, which is why. Where we go here? Here we go. Okay. All right, so we're exposing port 80. We're moving into the app directory of our container. And then we're going to set our entry point. So again, when we go to our container, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to have a .NET application, and then we're going to provide this .dll, which is essentially a built application in .NET. Okay, cool. So I can save this here. And now let's bring up the terminal. I want to make sure I am in the right space here. I might need to switch to something like, let's see, something like this might be a little better. Fantastic. All right, let me clear the terminal. And now if I do, now we have to actually build the image because we have the Docker file. Essentially, we have the recipe to build our image. We can do Docker. Let me just make sure I have Docker available here. We'll do Docker version. Okay, I do have Docker. Cool. And now we're going to do Docker build. We're going to build the image. We're going to do -t, which is to provide the name. And we'll call this reservation system. And then we'll just do dot. So what is this command saying? So I'm telling Docker to build the Docker file that I'm currently in. And this works because I'm in a directory that has a Docker file. And the -t is the name of the image. I've called it reservation system. And then the dot at the very end is essentially saying it's in the current directory. So let's let this run. And hopefully nothing is going to give us an error. Fantastic. If you get an error, you'll usually see it in like red font. Okay. All right, cool. No errors here. So now I can do Docker image list, and we'll get a list of images that I have on my machine. I'm not actually very sure what we have here. All right, so we see we have the reservation system, which we just created 17 seconds ago. I was working with another demo before, so that was 2 hours ago, and then I have some other images in there too, right? But the one we created, which is of interest for this demo, is this one on the top here. Fantastic. So let's try to test it locally first. So we can do Docker run. So remember, we have a image, so we have everything we need to create a container, but it's not a container until we run it. So I'm going to do Docker run. We're going to do -p to expose the ports. So remember when I put expose 80? So that means because that's in my Docker file, that means that this 80 port we can expose via another port. So we have to provide the -p, and we're going to say, okay, 80 will be exposed via 8080. Okay, fantastic. Then we're going to -d, which essentially tells it to run in the background since there's no UI for this application. It's just an API. We don't need it to be taking up the terminal. And then we're just going to provide the name of the container. We're going to call it reservations, and it's going to be built off the reservation system. Okay, so we're creating a container built that's called reservations of the reservation system image that we just built, right? So now if I go to my local host, let me open up a new local host, and then 8080, and then I go APIs, reservations. Let me show you. Let me bring this up here. Awesome. So can everyone see that? Let me do full screen here. Okay, so on top here, I did localhost 8080. Again, remember, we use the command to run the Docker container on 8080. /API says reservation/1, and we see we have here a result, reservation 1, custom ID, all these kinds of things, correct? Awesome, so locally it's working. So I'm gonna close this, and then I'm gonna stop actually the image because we don't need it to go locally anyway. So I do Docker PS. We see Docker PS will give us essentially a snapshot of the containers that are running. If you're not familiar with PS, when you work with Bash, PS will also give you a process snapshot, right? So it's cool that there's some sort of consistency there. If we do Docker PS-A, it'll show us not only the ones that are running, but ones that have been stopped as well. And what I want to do actually is just stop that container, Docker container stop, and we can just provide the name reservations. And it'll stop that. And if I do Docker PS now, we don't have any running containers. Fantastic. I can remove the container, but I'm going to do that a little later, just so I don't run out of time. So what we're going to do now is move into the Azure portal and create a container registry. So to do this, I'm just going to open this up here. Here we go. And I'm going to say portal.azure.com. Fantastic. Oh, let me just make sure I'm signed in before I show anybody anything. Here we go. Outlook. I'm going to go back here. I'm just going to sign in first. 1 second, everyone. Alrighty, cool. Work should be good here. So remember I said we need a container registry first, and Azure has one called container registries. We're just going to go to that one first. And I'm going to create, a new one for everyone. Actually, you know what? Because we're running a little short on time, I'm not going to create a new one. I'm just going to deploy it to the same one. So I have this container demo GPS, right? Now the key here is when you're working locally and access keys, you can turn on this admin user, so you can push images and things like that just via a username and password. In production, please do not do that. You need to obviously use whether you use Azure Directory or however it used to authenticate. Yeah, but for demo purposes, you can simply turn this on. Okay, so we have a username and a password here too. So what I'm going to do locally is push my image, my Docker image. Let me open this one up again. So what I'm going to do is, if we go to repositories, you see I already have a reservation system that I had pushed. Let me close this actually. Let me delete this repository, just so it's less confusing. Okay, cool. So I don't have any repositories in here yet. So what I'm going to do is first tag this. So I'm going to do Docker tag reservation system, and then the latest one of that, I'm going to tag it with, I think it's container demo gps dot azure cr.io reservation system. Let me just make sure I have the right name here. System latest. Okay. Tagging is just providing a name for your image, correct? So now if I do Docker image list, you see I have this container demo GPS that I just created at the moment, right? Cool. So now I'm going to log into my container registry. I'll have to use Docker login, and then the name of my registry is container demo GP. I think it's container. Again, let me double check that. Site boot could be wrong. Let me open it up. It is in here. And the way you get that is you just go to your access keys, and then you'll have your registry name up here. I'm just going to copy that here. And then I'm going to paste that in here. And it would be .azure container registry.io. Provide that in here. And then I need to provide the username. I'm gonna copy that in here. Oh, it's already logged in. I think this is probably because I logged in before. But if you're not logged in, you'll just need to grab that username and that password too. Okay, cool. And then now what we can do is just do docker push to container demo gps.azure.cr.io reservation system latest. We'll push that. I think we did everything right there. Okay, so essentially what's going on here is like we've tagged our image with a name, we've logged into our Azure Container Registry, and now we're pushing our image to our container registry. That's what we're doing. So now I'm going to open up my portal, and I'm going to be able to see my repository there. You saw that I deleted any repositories that I had there, and there was nothing in there. Once this is done uploading, I'm going to show you what is going to appear there in a second, okay? Let me drink some water. I've been talking for too long. All right, so this shouldn't take too long. But yeah, let me take a look at some questions here. Is the session being recorded? Will we have any recording? Yeah, this session is being recorded on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube and my YouTube channel. So if you go to the Reactor YouTube, you'll see it there. I think it's available within 24 hours. And again, I will also update the GitHub with the recording, so y'all can visit this at any point. But if you follow me on social media, you follow my YouTube, you'll be able to see it there too. Depends on that. Oh, we have here. Here we go. This is the Reactor YouTube channel. You'll be able to find a recording there too. So it looks like we're at almost a gig. It's still going. It's still going. Oh, let's see. Is it done? I think it should almost be done. Just to sort of get through this demo, I'll try to answer all the questions later, towards the end. We have some time. I still need to deploy this to container instances. Okay, cool. So it looks like that's done. So now let me bring up this here. Here we go. So now if I go to repositories, you'll see I have this reservation system here. And this was just now, 6:47 Eastern time. Fantastic. So now I'm like, all right, I have my image here, but remember, an image is not in container unless it's running, right? So what I'm going to do is go to container instances, actually, which is a service that you can use to host your instances, your containers inside of Azure. Then we're going to go to the user create subscription. I'm going to use a container demo resource group. Goodness. I'm going to call this reservation system. And then I'm going to put it US2. Okay, so image source. So where are we grabbing this image from? Which container registry? We can use Docker Hub or another registry, or we can use Azure Container Registries, or we can use a quick start image. Fantastic, cool. So I selected the container demo registry that I created, the image that I provided, and then just use the latest tag there. Next, I'm going to go to networking and make sure that 8080 is available on TCP. Fantastic. And I'm just going to say reservations. I'm just going to call it reservations at the moment. Then I'm going to hit advanced, and my restart policy, I'm going to set it to always. Essentially, how do you want, what behavior do you want your container to have when it needs to restart? I'm going to set it to always. This is more of an, I guess, intermediate level. But if you follow the resources that I linked, it'll talk to you a little bit more about restart policies there. Next, I'm going to hit restart and review and create, not restart. Sorry, it's been a long day. And then this should go ahead and create, essentially deploy our container, our image, and create a container for us. So let's give this a second. This takes a few minutes here. Let me grab a little bit more water. Recording is available just after the live finishes. Yes, usually it's pretty much available. Sometimes I've seen YouTube glitch, and it just takes a couple of hours, but usually it's available right away. Let's let it go. Oh, and I provided reservations as the FQDN there, just so when we visit the URL, it's easier instead of typing like an IP address or something like that. Fantastic. Let me go ahead and close a couple of things here because we're pretty much done with Visual Studio Code and such. We have about 10 minutes left. Hopefully this doesn't take too long. I'm going to close this here. I'm going to close this here too. There we go. I'm going to go on here. All right, awesome. Almost done. I think I did this like an hour ago just to verify everything was working. It took about 3 minutes or so. I'm curious if anyone in the chat has worked with container apps. It's one of the newest sort of cloud native services in Azure. They look really neat. I think it's sort of similar to Google Cloud Run, Google Cloud Run, I believe. Essentially managed containers, right? But very cool. Okay, cool. So it's created. If I go to resource now, let's take a look. I have an FQD, and here, remember, it's reservations because I provided that when I created it in the advanced settings. I mean, the network settings. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste this in here, and then I'm going to add the API. Then I'm going to just say the one, and let's see what it returns to us. Sometimes it takes a second to fully deploy. So if this doesn't provide something, you know what? We'll go into containers here on the left side. And we can see that our reservation system from our container demo.azure.cr, which is our Azure Container Registry, is running. And it so it got pulled. So it was pulled, started. It might still be starting, which is why it hasn't run yet. So let's give it a second. If I refresh this, let's see what it says. It's running. Can I do it now? Nope, not yet. This should work because it's started container. I think it's still starting up. Let's go here one more. No, okay, let's give it a second. Let's give it a few more minutes before we try it. But essentially, it should just work for us. Also, you have the option to connect to your container via bash, or the born again shell or the bash shell, right? Or the sed shell. So if you click connect here, essentially you're running a command line inside of your container, which I think is pretty neat. I don't know if this will work because it's still starting up. Oh, look, it is. Look. So what if we do ls? See, we do ls. We're actually inside of our container. And we see all the things that have been copied to the container. Look, we have all these libraries and packages. Pretty neat. I didn't know that. All right. Let's see. Let's go refresh. Did it start? I mean, did it? Why is that not working for us? Let's go over here. Let me copy that. Let me paste this. I might be going to, and then I do / I think it's reservation /1. I could be going to the wrong URL. No. Okay, let me make sure I'm using the right URL. Deployed. Blah blah blah. Give me 1 second, and I will have everything we need. All right, let me take a look. I'm pretty sure it's like it's running already for us. One sec. Let's see. What is the URL? What is the URL? This is the issue that I had because I didn't know the, I didn't build the application. Let me go here. But I thought I wrote it down somewhere. One sec. Okay, so it should be under, Okay, I did it wrong. So it should be here. /API /reservation /1. There we go. Perfect. All right. I knew it, everyone. All right. So you see, we still got that JSON content that we had when we did it locally. And cool. That kind of ends our demo here. We got it just on time. I'm notorious for having errors and mistakes in every single one of my demos. All right, so what I'm going to do is going to answer some questions. Let's take a look at what's going on here. Let me see. Let's see. There's a bunch of questions in here about tagging rule. Let me see. Yeah, there's a recording. Remember. Let me see. Let's see. I got also another awesome video would be to go over using Docker to build a dev container. I love that. And VS Code would be another great use case for Docker. Dev containers are fantastic. So much fun. So much fun to work with. Honestly, I think the future of cloud development. Let's see. I think I got pretty much everything here. Yeah, so pretty cool. We got some theory on Docker. We got some hands-on with container registry, Docker images, Docker file, deploy to Docker registry, to Docker instance. Yeah, we did a lot in an hour. Yeah, pretty much. That's it. Like next week we have the Kubernetes session this time, but next week. And then we have this exact session in Spanish on Thursday at the same time. If you're interested in seeing this content in Spanish, or maybe you know English and you want to learn Spanish, maybe learning it through tech would be interesting. Okay, fantastic. Firas, I don't know if you have anything to add here towards the end, but feel free to hop on now.
Thank you so much, Gwen. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for this great session. Thank you all for joining. Just one last thing. I just shared in the chat the link for our feedback. We really love to hear what you think of this session. So please, if you have time, just go to this AKA link and put the 15160 event code, and please let us know what you think. And that's it. Thank you so much. All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.